From Lagos, the nation's commercial capital, this is the News at 10. Live from Channels Television. Reporting tonight, Amarachi Ubani.
Good evening and welcome. Tonight, International Monetary Fund approves federal government's $3.4 billion emergency loan request, just as Senate approves request to raise 850 billion naira fresh loan from the domestic capital market. House of Representatives passes resolution directing executive to screen immigration documents of Chinese nationals and businesses in Nigeria. Passes bill to repeal 2014 Quarantine Act. Presidential Task Force on COVID-19 warns against interstate travels, reveals U.S. President Donald Trump has promised to send ventilators to Nigeria in a phone conversation with President Muhammadu Buhari. And confirmed cases of coronavirus in the United States passes the 1 million mark as some states begin to ease restrictions. Plus business and news from Abuja, the FCT, and later from our London studios.
On business news tonight, launch of African Free Trade Agreement suspended due to disruptions caused by COVID-19.
On sports news tonight, French League season cancelled after the government confirmed that no sporting events will be held until September owing to the coronavirus pandemic.
And from Abuja, health authorities confirm 2 COVID-19 test laboratories now active in Kano State as Presidential Task Force Committee investigates reports of mysterious deaths.
The Executive Board of the International Monetary Fund has approved the federal government's request for $3.4 billion emergency loan to combat COVID-19. The IMF's Managing Director, Kristalina Georgieva, in a tweet this evening, says the fund supports Nigeria's efforts to limit the effect of COVID-19 and the sharp fall of oil prices. The US $3.4 billion approved by our board is the largest IMF COVID-19 emergency financing provided to date. It will help Nigeria free up more resources to protect lives and livelihoods. The federal government had applied for the full withdrawal of its $3.4 billion contribution with the IMF to combat the impact of the coronavirus. Meanwhile, the Senate has given accelerated approval to President Buhari's request for a loan of 850 billion naira for the domestic capital market to finance projects in the 2020 budget. This comes as the lawmakers reconvene after a 5-week break on account of the coronavirus pandemic. The Senate is also asking the executive to fast-track submission of the revised medium-term expenditure framework, a fiscal strategy paper, and 2020 budget to the National Assembly. Our correspondent Linda Akibe has more.
It's not easy access into the National Assembly for workers and journalists, even with valid identity cards. It's a measure by the National Assembly management to have fewer people in the Assembly as Parliament resumes plenary after shutting down on March 24th because of the coronavirus pandemic. Inside the Senate chamber, lawmakers appear to be taking personal safety and physical distancing seriously.
A great pleasure to welcome you back.
The Senate President reads a letter from President Buhari requesting approval for a loan.
To ensure that there are adequate funds to finance critical projects and programs in the 2020 budget, I hereby seek the Senate's approval by resolution to raise the 850 billion naira of new external borrowing in naira from the domestic capital market instead of from the international capital markets.
The request is given quick approval, but the Senate President directs his committees on finance and appropriation to get more details of a loan from the Minister of Finance. However, in a telephone interview, the chairman of the Finance Committee, Senator Adiola Olamileko, tells Channels Television that the 850 billion naira loan is not a fresh request, but already captured in the 2020 budget.
Mr. President.
The Senate also considers a motion to review the national response to COVID-19.
The Senate is concerned that the ineffectiveness of the lockdown, due to, among others, poor awareness of citizens about the dangers of COVID-19, poor mobilization, education and enlightenment of the citizens, and inadequacies and inefficiencies in the distribution of the palliatives during the lockdown.
What concerns me the most now is the agitation, the raging agitation that's more or less trying to rush Mr. President to reopen the country. People are very, very worried about the effect of this pandemic on the economy, justifiably so. But Mr. President, it is my belief that you have to be alive first. Before you can seek the benefit of the prospering economy.
After the debate, the Senate makes several recommendations to the executive, one of which is calling on the executive to re-strategize and ensure a more efficient collaboration between federal, state, local governments and the private sector. Linda Akibi, Channels Television News.
In the lower legislative chamber, the lawmakers have passed a resolution asking the executive to screen immigration documents of every Chinese resident in Nigeria and the quota of all Chinese businesses. This is in reaction to the treatment of Nigerians in China by the Chinese government. The House also passed a bill to repeal the Quarantine Act of 2004 through second reading. Our correspondent, Terry Kumi, reports.
Almost every lawmaker is wearing a mask. One is even wearing a visor. The questionable deaths in Kano State gained the attention of lawmakers, as raised by the leader of the House, who is also from Kano.
Mr. Speaker, I'm afraid the way we are going in Kano, if care is not taken, the ravages we are undergoing may be worse than Boko Haram.
The only bill up for consideration is for an act to repeal the Quarantine Act of 2004, which the Speaker, who is also the sponsor, says is outdated.
This bill allows the NCDC to be proactive, to investigate, e.g. epidemiological investigations and surveillance propaganda programs.
I have seen the title of the bill. I have not seen the bill, the content. I was shocked when one of the content of the bill will be giving NCDC or whatever they're called the right to do certain things. We've been told that they're going to be a chip. In fact, that the vaccine is here already. So when we put in the chip, the monitors from UK, from US, what we are doing in our rooms and whatever. And now there's a portion now saying NCDC will even have a right to order these things. That was why, Mr. Chair, you observed me shaking and wondering and perplexed.
The bill scales second reading despite the huge dissent in voices.
The question now is that the bill is second. Those people say aye. Those against say nay. The ayes have it.
The bill, which was initially scheduled for speedy passage, is however deferred to the next sitting to allow members properly study it.
Of China.
And following the poor treatment of Nigerians in China by the Chinese government, a motion for prompt government intervention is considered and adopted.
Mandate the committees on interior, local content and commerce to investigate the Nigerian Immigration Corporate Affairs Commission, Nigerian Content and Development Monitoring Board, and any other relevant ministry, department or agency to check the validity of all immigration documents of every Chinese person in Nigeria and the expatriate quota of all the Chinese businesses in Nigeria to ascertain the number of illegal and undocumented Chinese immigrants in Nigeria.
The approval of the latest round of borrowings has raised concern over the impact of alarming debt profile on Nigeria's economy in the medium to long term. Our next report takes a look at the timeline of the president's borrowing since assuming office in 2015.
Nigeria's rising debt profile has been one drawn with several concerns as the Senate just approved 850 billion naira borrowing from the domestic capital market to fund part of this year's budget, one in many domestic and external debt facilitated by the federal government. The figures since 2016, when President Muhammadu Buhari passed his first fiscal budget after assuming office, has risen astronomically to 27.4 trillion naira as of December 2019. The country's domestic borrowing tops the chart by a whopping 67%. In 2016, when President Buhari passed the 6.6 trillion naira budget of recovery and growth, the deficit to run the budget stood at 2.3 trillion naira after the country recorded its first recession in 25 years. Same year, the plan to borrow $29.96 billion under the 2016-2018 external borrowing plan to fund infrastructure projects hit a brick wall as the National Assembly rejected the proposal. The fund was to cater for 39 projects, including power, mining, roads, agriculture, health, water, and educational sectors. As revealed by the federal government, the loan tenure will last between 20 to 30 years with a 1.5% repayment. In 2020, part of the highlights include a finance law that introduced an increase in value-added tax from 5 to 7.5% and a peaked budget of 10.33 trillion naira, which was later slashed by 320 billion naira to 10.27 trillion naira and a reviewed deficit of 5.18 trillion naira. Nigeria's external debt increased by $16.84 billion from $10.32 billion in June 2015 to $27.16 billion in June 2019. While domestic debt rose by 7.29 trillion naira from 10.09 trillion naira in 2015 to 17.38 trillion naira in 2019. The question on the mind of many are, is borrowing the answer to Nigeria's economic stability? And does the federal government have enough resources to service debts?
We will be looking at the approval of loans for the federal government by the International Monetary Fund, as well as the Senate, the benefits and the consequences later on tonight. But following reports of delays of food trucks at various checkpoints across the country, the presidency has clarified the restriction of movement order. In a series of tweets, the Special Assistant to the President on Media, Mr. Garba Shehu, explains that the restriction does not apply to vehicles transporting essential commodities such as food. Other essential items that can be transported include pharmaceutical and sanitary supplies, personal care items, agrochemicals and machinery, electrical products and electronics, oil and gas, courier services, health supplies, and protective garments. Mr. Shehu says the trucks must be allowed free movement as long as they adhere to precautionary measures against COVID-19. In part two, after the break, we'll be joined by former chairman of the Board of Directors of the Nigerian Economic Summit Group, Mr. Buka Kyari, to examine the implications of President Buhari's 850 billion naira loan request. Stay with us. If you've just joined us, you're watching the news at 10 live on Channels Television Lagos. A reminder of our top stories. International Monetary Fund approves federal government's $3.4 billion emergency loan request, just as Senate approves request to raise 850 billion naira fresh loan from the domestic capital market. House of Representatives passes resolution directing executive to screen immigration documents of Chinese nationals and businesses in Nigeria. Passes bill to repeal 2004 Quarantine Act. Presidential Task Force on COVID-19 warns against interstate travels. Reveals U.S. President has promised to send ventilators to Nigeria in a phone conversation with President Muhammadu Buhari. And confirmed cases of coronavirus in U.S. passes 1 million mark as some states begin to ease lockdown. Our website, channelstv.com, has more information on our top stories and others. Subscribe and watch Channels Television's live stream on YouTube and other social media platforms using your mobile device browser, or download the Channels TV app for Android and iOS devices from their respective stores. You can also watch us via your smart TV platforms on Apple TV, Android TV, Fire TV, and Roku. Let's return to our lead story on the approval of the federal government's loan request by the IMF and the Senate today. I've been joined by the former chairman of the board of directors of the Nigerian Economic Summit Group, Mr. Bukar Kyari, to examine the implications of President Buhari's 850 billion naira loan request. Thank you for joining us tonight, and great to see you amidst the lockdown and the situation we're currently in.
Thank you very much.
So, first of all, 2 loans approved for the president, the IMF, the COVID-19 to fight the COVID-19 pandemic, and then the other from the Senate to fund the budgets. Are we on the right path borrowing? I know I said earlier this almost seemed like we're going back to the basics.
Exactly. We seem to be on a borrowing binge. Of course, that $3.4 billion from IMF was part of our own contribution. So I hope and pray that that comes with little or no conditionalities. Otherwise, IMF would basically be spearheading our economic future or determine it. That's what I understand. Therefore, it may be actually no strings attached type of loan. There is another nearly $3 billion that's still somewhere in there between Africa Development Bank and one other development entity. Now, we come down to this 850 billion. Now, the debt management framework or strategy that we've heard before was to borrow externally rather than internally for 2 reasons. One is crowding out of the domestic corporate borrowing or the private sector. 2 is that the interest rates of external debts were much lower than what we see with T-bills then. So now that T-bills have crashed and the credit outlook for Nigeria is iffy, it made prudent sense to actually look for the borrowings domestically. So that might be the strategy that the government is taking. But debt is still debt. You would end up paying for it. And therefore, the key thing is, one, we need to apply it in a manner that is going to be more productive. If we are borrowing for productivity enhancing activities such as basic infrastructure, healthcare, education, then it will pay off down the road. If, however, we are borrowing to pay salaries and consumptive things, then, hey, we are going to pay for it down the road, and we are going to be poorer for it.
Yeah, and I think that the government is accountable to the Nigerian people who elected these officials. But the DMO, the Nigerian debtman, it says the debt, the 850 billion naira, should not be seen as a fresh loan.
Well, it's no matter how you do the arithmetic, it means that you have. I mean, if, let's say, you're running your household and your salary cannot keep up with it, you need to go borrow. Now, if you're borrowing, whether it is new or an old one that you reached out for before, it will add to the debt service. And you remember that we did our budget this time. The Nigerian budget was submitted to the National Assembly in October. For the first time, the budget was passed very early in the new year. Now, that was an achievement. Unfortunately, the pandemic was not factored in. Therefore, the cutting of the budget by 1.5 trillion naira, plus the fact that the oil prices have come down, therefore, those assumptions need to be adjusted. And when you adjust those, you would see that there is a bigger hole still left. So the deficit financing have to come in to take care of it. It is a good one that they went to the National Assembly rather than pretend that nothing is wrong, and then 6 months down the road, you find yourself not having enough money to spend.
Yeah, and it appears that all is focused now on combating the coronavirus. But what is the capacity then of banks and the banking institutions to absorb the borrowing demands of the federal government?
That's going to be the interesting thing that we are going to see. So I think the central bank need to look at monetary adjustment of some of the things that the banks have. For example, CRR effectively is still remaining at that official rate. And you talk to bankers, you find that the real CRR that the central bank has quarantined, since we're in the season of quarantining things, is higher than the 22.5 or so percent that is officially there. So if that money can be released, then a lot can happen in the lending space. Mind you, the central bank still maintain that 65% loan to deposit ratios for banks. So banks still have to lend money, and with about maybe 40% or 35% of their money quarantined in central bank, that there is some gap or space left for them to do something that they can. Unfortunately, it's going to be a difficult one for the banking sector as well.
Yeah, and it appears we really can't get out of this without borrowing. But thank you again, Mr. Bukakari, for speaking with us tonight. Do stay safe.
You're welcome.
As
Thank
you
you.
go back. In the meantime, the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19 says Nigeria has now entered a new phase in the fight against COVID-19, which requires individuals taking personal responsibility very seriously. According to the task force chairman, Mr. Boss Mustafa, the gradual relaxation of lockdown as announced by President Buhari in his national broadcast does not mean the danger is over. The Director General of the Nigeria Center for Disease Control also appeals to state governments to scale up sample collections in order to facilitate the 2 million tests targeted within the next 3 months.
Presidential Task Force.
It's the usual daily news conference by the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19. Beginning with the chairman, members take their turn explaining some aspects of the presidential broadcast on Monday regarding the gradual relaxation of the lockdown and its implications for citizens.
The government is trying to do the best it can to provide safety and resources and facilities for us to combat COVID-19. But the response of the citizens on an individual and collective basis will determine whether we will succeed or not.
We need to redouble our efforts to comply with advisories, more especially as restrictions have been eased. Much more stringent compliance will be required from all of us.
By discouraging interstate travel, which is what the President announced yesterday, our aim is to limit transmission to areas where cases have not been reported.
The Minister of Information and Culture also informs the gathering about a conversation between President Buhari and the American president.
President Muhammadu Buhari today had a phone conversation with President Donald Trump. President Trump assured that the United States stands in solidarity with Nigeria in this difficult time and promised to send ventilators to support the country in its fight against the pandemic.
What is verbal autopsy?
It's time for questions, and reporters, among other issues, seek update on the Chinese medical team in Nigeria, how verbal autopsy will help unravel the cause of deaths in Kano, as well as the plight of Nigerians abroad waiting for evacuation.
As for the Chinese persons who came in, the tests have been done after their 14-day quarantine. All of them were negative.
Verbal autopsies is it's nothing new. It's a long established way of establishing the cause of death in people where you don't have the opportunity of doing a normal autopsy, which is a pathological process of collecting a sample and testing. And there are many reasons in our context where sometimes we don't have access to body samples and body fluids, which is how we would have done this normally in a biological context.
The lowest hanging fruit at the moment are those who have already paid for their flight coming from Dubai. To answer your question directly, we put a date of Monday, and we're going to do everything humanly possible to try and get that plane here first.
While it is expected that the government provides leadership in the fight against COVID-19, a huge responsibility rests on the shoulders of her citizens, as their action or inaction will ultimately define the outcome of efforts to stop the spread of the virus.
Let's head on now to Abuja, where Linda Kiwe is standing by with more on the news at 10. Hi, Linda. Always great to see you.
Hello, Amarachi. Good to see you too. Now, staying with the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19, the team says the increasing number of deaths in Kano State is becoming a source of concern to President Muhammadu Buhari. The leader of the team, Dr. Nasir Gwazo, told Governor Abdullahi Ganduje that their mission is to reinforce the state's existing response structure and identify areas of federal government interventions. Our correspondent Idris Jibreen reports. Meanwhile, the Kano State COVID-19 test center that was shut down on April the 22nd due to shortage of test kits and other safety equipment for operating staff has been reopened. The test center at the Aminu Kano Teaching Hospital was reopened on the 27th of April by the Presidential Task Force sent to Kano to ensure that every necessary measure is put in place to curtail the spread of the virus. The NCDC team from Abuja has been working around the clock to ensure that the Kano Testing Center begins operations.
Samples, yesterday, right now we are trying to run we have finished the mix, and then we're about to run the sample, but we had one or two hitches, so that's what we are trying to fix right now. We're about to run the machine to load the samples on the real-time machine, so that the first result will be coming out in like a couple of maybe 2 hours, 3 hours from now. And then the beautiful thing is that we're not only setting up the lab in AKTH, we're also at the advanced stage of setting up the BUK lab in the Center for Infectious Disease. And hopefully by tomorrow that one should be up and running. In fact, the machine we are using to test run this now is a machine from the BUK.
The Nasarawa state government has announced the first confirmed case of the coronavirus in the state. Governor Abdullahi Sule, who announced this today at the government house in Lafia, the state's capital, describes the index case as a young lady who traveled from Kano State last week despite restrictions in both states. She's now in isolation at the Dalhatu Araf Specialist Hospital in Lafia, where she is receiving treatment.
Last time, we had a lady that tested in Kokwana and she's positive. The lady actually traveled from Kano to come to Kokwana, and she was tested, and after the test it came out that she is positive. So it is sad for you to announce that Nasarawa has his first case of a positive case from this lady that traveled from Kano to Kokwana. We have already evacuated the lady from Kokwana to Lafia, where we have better facilities to take care of her. We have also isolated the family home where she came from, so that we can conduct the proper test, and ensure that none of the other members of the families is actually infected.
When the news at 10 returns, we have more updates on COVID-19. Plus, NLC asks employers to ensure they pay workers' salaries despite the COVID-19 lockdown. Join us again.
Welcome back. We can bring you that report now. The Presidential Task Force delegation on COVID-19 saying the increase in number of deaths in Kano State is becoming a source of concern to President Muhammadu Buhari. The leader of the team, Dr. Nasir Gwazo, told Governor Abdullahi Ganduje that their mission is to reinforce the state's existing response structure and identify areas of federal government interventions. Our correspondent, Idris Jibrin, reports.
For almost 2 weeks now, many people have been reported to have died in Kano following a mysterious disease that is yet to be identified by the state health workers.
We should be worried that people are losing their lives, and we shall rise to support the executive governor of this state to unravel this and tell the world what actually is happening in Kano.
Although preliminary investigations have not linked the death to the COVID-19 pandemic, Governor Abdullahi Ganduje says he is not willing to take any chances.
If you don't have a functional testing center like now, which is completely down for almost 1 week now, you find that to continue other processes is immaterial because you cannot move forward.
The leader of the presidential delegation explains that the team is in town to liaise with all stakeholders to identify the remote and immediate causes of the mass death and also reinforce the COVID-19 response in Kano.
I promise you we are not reinventing the wheel because the wheel has already been only to reinforce it and to make sure that there is synergy.
Already provision has been made for the isolation of mild cases with all necessary facilities provided on site. In the coming days, the delegation is expected to make available its findings. Idris Jibrin, Channels Television News.
A second case of COVID-19 has been recorded in Adamawa State. This was confirmed by the state governor, Umaru Fintiri, who says the carrier is a medical doctor working with a government hospital in Mubi. Governor Fintiri added that although there is no connection between the index case and the new one, the doctor must have had contact with many people while discharging his duties.
Just when we thought we are doing enough to flatten the curve, with the tremendous progress our index case is making towards complete recovery, I received yet another devastating update that out of the 8 samples we have pending at the NCDC referral lab in Abuja, 1 turned out positive, 6 are negative, and 1 still pending. With this, I regret to announce that we now have 2 COVID-19 confirmed cases in Adamawa State. What is striking about this case is the fact that it is not linked to the index case. Last week, we sent 8 samples to Abuja. 5 were direct contacts of the index case as traced, while 3 were new suspicious cases who were showing symptoms. Having additional case in the state is truly worrisome. More disturbing is the fact that the victim is a medical doctor in one of our hospitals in Mubi.
Bauchi State in the northeast has recorded 11 new COVID-19 cases, bringing the total number of the cases in the state to 25. The new cases were confirmed today by the Executive Chairman, Bauchi State Primary Health Care Development Agency, Dr. Rilwan Muhammad. The positive test results were sent in today from the Nigeria Center for Disease Control in Abuja. As the number of confirmed COVID-19 cases in Borno State continue to rise, health managers are worried about the attitude of some residents to the prescribed protocols. Head of the Case Management Unit COVID-19 Task Force, University of Maiduguri Teaching Hospital, Dr. Ibrahim Kida, told Channels Television in an exclusive interview that flouting of safety measures by some misguided residents shows that the people are living in denial. He said that attitude is what is fueling the spread of COVID-19 in the state, which is counterproductive to efforts and mechanisms to put in place to rid the state of the disease. 30 Almajiris who escaped from the COVID-19 isolation center at the NYSC camp in Kiyawa local government area of Jigawa State have been recaptured. The escapees, who are among the 676 evacuated to Jigawa State from Kano and Gombe states, reportedly escaped from the facility last night. A member of the State Task Force on COVID-19 who confirmed this to Channel Television explained that the parents of the children played a vital role in retrieving the escapees, who have been returned to the isolation center. And ahead of resumption of workers on May 4th, the Nigeria Labour Congress is asking employers of labour not to tamper with the salaries and wages of workers in the name of COVID-19. Addressing the news conference in Abuja on the occasion of the 2020 International Workers' Memorial Day, the president of the Nigeria Labour Congress, Comrade Ayuba Waba, says there is no excuse for employers of labour not to pay their workers. He appeals to the federal government to provide sufficient personal protective equipment and other facilities for health workers in the country.
A double-barrel event where
the usual fanfare of workers' celebration is missing as a few national officers of the Nigeria Labour Congress converge on Abuja to mark the 2020 International Workers' Memorial Day. The president of the Congress calls on the federal government to ensure the reduction in the number of fatalities among health workers in the front line of the fight against COVID-19.
The contribution of frontline workers, especially healthcare workers, have become the only buffer between death in thousands and death in millions. Every day, our healthcare workers courageously dare the dare of the dead in selfless service to rescue the lives of others. On a day like this, we salute the uncommon love, faith, courage, and sacrifice by frontline workers who have given more than what calls of duty demands.
With the planned resumption of work on the 4th of May 2020, the NLC warns employers not to toy with the livelihood of workers.
This is not the time to stop or deduct from worker salary. Such an action will be both illogical and illegal, as worker salary are core elements of employment contract and collective bargaining agreement. We have asked our affiliates and State Council to resist any salary deduction on the account of COVID-19. In fact, it will be evil for any employer at this point to think of deducting worker salary, especially those in the front line. We assure our workers that our priority in those trying times remains the cautious, gradual, evidence-led and smart restart of the economy so that our workers can go back to work.
On a solemn note, the workers symbolically remember their dead colleagues through a candlelight procession.
Solidarity forever.
Although the federal government has announced a gradual easing of the lockdown order in Lagos, Ogun and the Federal Capital Territory, the annual May Day celebration of workers will have to wait till 2021.
Kayode Kikulu is standing by now with business news.
Banking so easy, so simple. Dial star 894 hash now to experience it. You first, First Bank.
And you're welcome to Business News. The implementation of the African Free Trade Agreement will not begin as planned on July the 1st this year, and that's due to disruptions caused by the new coronavirus. The Secretary General of the AFCFTA, Wamkele Mene, who made this known in a video conference call, says the commencement of the trade deal will not hold due to the impact of the pandemic on its member countries. The Continental Free Trade Zone, which is widely regarded as an economic savior, is expected to create a $3.4 trillion economic bloc with 1.3 billion people across Africa. That's when it successfully takes effect. And some sharing news for the nation. The Republic of Germany says it has granted Nigeria 22.4 million euros, that's about 8.9 billion naira debt relief, in its support against COVID-19 pandemic in the country. In a statement released today in Abuja, the European economic powerhouse mentions that it has successfully campaigned in the G20 group of countries and the Paris Club group of creditor countries in favor of a debt moratorium for countries that have been heavily affected by the economic impact of COVID-19. The country hints that it has also pledged a total of 12 million euros or 4.8 billion naira in additional support to the West Africa Health Organization, which is a regional health institution of the ECOWAS. Let's head over to the stock exchange, where the domestic stock market maintains its uptrend for a second day in the week, with an additional 0.49% increase on the benchmark all-share index at the close of today's trading session. Let's join Bisi Adebayo for more details.
Hello and welcome to the Stock Market Report. Some 58 billion naira was added to the market today as the equities market extended its bullish run, with the all-share index settling at 22,727.87. And just like Monday, the banking sector drove today's gains following the CBN's refund of some of the money debited from the banks last week. Investors also showed interest in the consumer goods and insurance indices. Cornerstone Insurance was the day's topmost gainer ahead of 17 others, which also includes Lasaco Insurance and FCMB. Warpic Insurance also led 9 other decliners for the day. The total volume of transactions came in higher at 266.62 million, and that was boosted by the shares of UBA, FBNH, and Access Bank. And that's it on the Stock Market Reports. I am Bisi Adebayo.
Thank you, Bisi. Outside the country, major global stocks markets ended the day's trading session with mixed performance amid a flurry of latest earnings as well as lower oil prices. Let's take a look at some of the figures. Thank you for watching Business News Tonight. I'm Kayode Okikiolu. The news at 10 continues with Amarachi.
Banking so easy, so simple. Dial *894# now to experience it. You first, First Bank.
Thanks, Kayode. Still ahead of the news at 10, confirmed cases of coronavirus in the United States passes 1 million mark as some states begin to ease lockdown. Stay with us. Welcome back. 85 contact persons out of 267 tested in Kano State have been confirmed to have symptoms related to COVID-19. This was confirmed today by the State Coordinator, Rapid Response on COVID-19, Dr. Tijani Hussaini. He says 3 of the contact persons have been discharged, while results of 283 samples taken to Abuja are being awaited. More than 1 million people across the United States have contracted the coronavirus, surpassing China in March for the most confirmed cases of infection than any other country. Death toll, according to the tally by the Johns Hopkins University, says the death toll has passed 56,000 and getting closer to the 60,000 mark. Here's Simon Pusey with more international news and around the world in 5.
Good evening and welcome to the Channel Studios in London with your international news around the world in 5. US President Donald Trump has said he can't imagine why US hotline calls about disinfectant have risen after he suggested injecting the substance to treat coronavirus. The governors of Michigan and Maryland on Sunday blamed the president for the spike in such calls. Following heavy criticism from medical professionals, Mr. Trump said his remarks were made sarcastically. Britain's Prime Minister Boris Johnson has led a nationwide tribute to healthcare and other key workers who have died from contracting COVID-19. Healthcare workers across the country braved the rain as they held a minute's silence before erupting into applause to commemorate those who had lost their lives. Britain has one of the world's highest death tolls, with over 21,092 hospital deaths. Among those, 98 health and care service workers are known to have died after testing positive for the virus. New Zealanders are returning to some form of normality after they emerged from almost 5 weeks of strict lockdown. The alert level has shifted to level 3, allowing takeaway food shops and some non-essential businesses to reopen. Around 400,000 people returned to work after the Prime Minister shifted the country's alert level down a notch, loosening some of the tough movement restrictions that shut down businesses for weeks.
More people going back to work today, we need to be even more vigilant at level 3 to prevent any inadvertent spreading of the virus. We must continue to stay home where possible, including for work and education. Please stay regional and limit non-essential travel. And even though you can expand your bubble, keep it as small as possible and exclusive.
Muslims in Jerusalem have been gathering in large open spaces to ensure they keep social distance during Ramadan. Muslims would typically pack into Jaffa's Ottoman-era shrines for evening worship, but holding personal prayer rugs and wearing face masks, dozens of Muslims in Jaffa used parking spaces as social distancing markers on Sunday night as they congregated for Taraweeh prayers held nightly after the faithful break their fast. Israel has reported 204 deaths and over 15,500 cases of the virus. Palestinian officials have meanwhile reported 2 deaths and around 350 cases in the occupied West Bank and Gaza Strip. The Yellow Crane Tower, a landmark tourist attraction in Wuhan, the Chinese city where the COVID-19 epidemic originated, will reopen on Wednesday after almost 100 days of closure. Staff members at the scenic spot are disinfecting the area and making preparations for its reopening on Tuesday. Starting on Wednesday, the number of visitors will be capped at 5,400 daily. In the Lebanese city of Tripoli, following overnight clashes between anti-government demonstrators and the army. Protesters are angry at the country's worsening economic crisis, which has been exacerbated by the recent lockdown. The economic meltdown has rekindled a protest movement that first rallied in October to demand the overhaul of Lebanon's ruling elite. And finally, a man in Spain had to be rescued and taken to hospital after being trapped under foam from a leaked firefighting system. The leak flooded an industrial park in the town of Zaragoza overnight. It spread for 200 metres in the streets and was between 4 and 5 metres high. Since the flood, cars have been struggling to drive through the foam. And that's your international news around the world in 5. Now back to the Channel studios in Lagos.
Thanks, Simon. Very quickly, the Nigerian lady put up for sale by Lebanese Wael Jero on Facebook has been rescued and is currently with officials of the Nigerian mission in Beirut. The chairman of the Nigerians in Diaspora Commission, Mrs. Abike Dabiri-Erewa, disclosed this on her social media handle today. The man had put her up for sale for $8,000. From the main news again, the International Monetary Fund has approved the federal government's $3.4 billion emergency loan request, just as the Senate approved request to raise 850 billion naira fresh loan from the domestic capital market. That's the news at 10 tonight. Thank you for watching. I am Amarachi Ubani. Good night and stay safe.